He told me I wasn't good enough. Not successful enough. Not polished enough. And then he dumped me. For a woman he called better. But 2 years later the same man was standing in front of me, not as my equal, not as my partner, but as my employee. This is the story of how that happened, how humiliation became fuel, how steady work rewired a life, and how the quietest victories sometimes hurt the most. After college, Michelle thought she had finally found stability when she started dating Daniel. She was hardworking, juggling multiple part-time jobs just to survive, while Daniel dreamed of a luxurious life, traveling the world, and living in the fast lane. At first, Michelle believed their love could withstand the challenges. But as time went by, things began to change. The intimacy faded, replaced by coldness and excuses. Daniel began making subtle yet cutting remarks, saying things like, "I don't think you fit into the kind of life I'm aspiring to live." He would come home late without explanation, sometimes not at all, and Michelle felt the distance growing like an unbridgeable canyon. Before the fall there were small ways the world made sense. Michelle remembers the small kitchen where she learned to be practical. The apartment was 1 bedroom, with a window that looked out over a cracked sidewalk and a second-hand fire escape that smelled faintly of oil after summer storms. She kept a little calendar on the fridge where she tracked bills and shifts. Some nights the light over that calendar was the only light on in the neighborhood. The microwave hummed, the kettle whistled. She learned to make dinners that fit under $10. She had friends who checked in, who brought over leftovers and said, "You'll get there," without seeing the harder truth that getting there meant missing parties and skipping weekend trips. At work she learned to read people fast. On slow days behind the coffee bar she practiced small talk that made customers feel seen. She learned the tone that got big tips and the way to hold eye contact without seeming needy. The college lectures were a rhythm between the arms of racks, the cash drawer, the classroom podium. Her professors noticed the girl who always had a pen ready, who responded to questions, who stayed late to discuss the text. But outside of class and work she learned that life's small armor is made of patience and a stubborn kind of faith. Daniel's charm had been intoxicating. He smelled like expensive cologne in a way Michelle found amusing. It seemed like a prop to his swagger. But there were afternoons when they would sit at the bus stop together, his shoulder just a hair away from hers, and he would talk about a life that seemed lit from within, trips to faraway cities, gathering friends in glossy apartments, dinners with wine poured from the kind of bottles Michelle had only seen in advertisements. With him, she learned to watch people move in fast lanes she had only visited on holiday weekends, the way they smiled, the easy way they used certain words. It felt like being tutored in someone else's language. The comments started as casual as lint in the hem of a shirt and then grew heavy enough to drag her down. Daniel would notice someone across the street and say, "That's the sort of car someone in my circle would drive," or he would laugh and say, "We can't be friends with people like that if we want to move up." The long nights were not always nights out, sometimes they were long in the sense that he carried a distance in his body. He would come home late and the apartment would feel colder for it. Michelle learned to brace herself at the doorway, to expect the shrug, the half-answer about work stuff, the way he would hold his phone like a secret. She tried to talk. The conversations grew thin and brittle, like fall branches after a storm. He would answer with platitudes about goals and vision, leaving out the tiny human details. Michelle could see where his eyes warmed the most, at a restaurant window with designer handbags reflected in it, at a social media post with influencer comments. The more he chased the image of life, the less he had for the messy, real work of a relationship. One night, Michelle finally got invited to a rooftop party with Daniel. She was excited, believing it would be the moment she was introduced proudly to his friends as his girlfriend. But the reality crushed her heart. Instead of acknowledgement, Daniel humiliated her in front of everyone. Looking her directly in the eyes, he said, "You don't fit into the future I see for myself." You're not the caliber of person I want to associate with. It's over. The words pierced her soul like daggers. The crowd watched as Michelle stood frozen, tears threatening to fall. That was the night her world shattered. The rooftop party is the kind of memory that breaks into 1,000 tiny, precise images. The string lights that made the city look like stars had fallen to the roof, the hum of a jazz trio in the corner, the small cloud of cigarette smoke hanging between guests. Michelle had smoothed her dress in the powder room and practiced a smile that felt like armor. She had imagined the introductions, the brief pride of being claimed as his person. When Daniel's voice cut across the hum and his words fell like sharp coins, the social air went cold. People glanced away, some laughed in awkward defense of the moment, others shifted seats like they had been watching a film. Michelle felt the hush inside her chest widen into something that made it hard to breathe. She walked out empty-handed, not just out of the party but out of the future she'd imagined. Soon after, Michelle learned that Daniel had been seeing someone else, Vanessa, a wealthy real estate tycoon from Buckhead. Vanessa was glamorous, sophisticated, and older, with influence and money Daniel could only dream of. Their relationship quickly became the talk of social media. Pictures of luxury vacations, expensive gifts, and fancy dinners flooded Michelle's feed. It seemed like Daniel had traded her in for a better life, and Michelle was left to pick up the pieces. Finding out was the small, private violence of modern life, a screen glow at 2 a.m., a feed of highlight reels and curated perfection. There were images of white sand shores, a bottle uncorked before sunset, a caption that read like a postcard. Michelle felt the slow burn of loss morphing into something else, not just sorrow but a steady, practical anger. She deleted the app for a day, then made a list. She wrote down classes she would finish, names she would email, nights she would spend on skill building rather than scrolling. The notebook she kept for these things became less about fantasy and more about a map, one line at a time. But instead of letting the pain destroy her, Michelle used it as fuel. She doubled down on her efforts to improve herself. She studied, worked harder than ever, and climbed the ranks at her job. Late nights that once ended in tears now ended in progress. The girl who was once cast aside became sharper, stronger, and wiser. Over time, her dedication paid off. She earned promotions, respect, and a name for herself in her industry. Slowly, Michelle began to heal, not by forgetting the betrayal, but by proving to herself that she was worth so much more than Daniel had ever believed. What looks like overnight change is always the sum of many small choices. Michelle learned to carry a portfolio into meetings, to edit proposals until the language was clean and persuasive, to follow up without pleading. A mentor took notice, an account went well, a client renewed not because of charm but because of measurable results she had engineered. She kept her nights lean and her calendar full of skill building, accepting that sometimes dignity is the accumulation of consistent, boring work. The window in her office that she could now open each morning felt like a small purchase of a new life. 2 years later, Michelle's company hosted a prestigious networking gala. Big names, wealthy clients, and powerful executives filled the room. Michelle, now a guest of honor, walked in with her head held high, dressed elegantly, carrying herself with quiet confidence. As she mingled, she thought she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. But the man ducked away before she could confirm. The gala itself was an exercise in choreography, name badges on satin lanyards, a jazz trio tuning themselves into the background, caterers moving in practiced silence. Michelle smoothed her dress, checked the flash of a camera, and remembered all the late nights that had led to this hour. She had rehearsed a short speech about community investment and resilience, and now, as she walked the line of attendees, someone clapped her shoulder and called her by name. For a second she felt absurdly grateful, until she noticed a movement at the periphery. Moments later, Daniel spotted her. Only this time, he wasn't a guest. He was in a catering uniform, serving wine and appetizers. Seeing Michelle radiant and successful filled him with dread. Embarrassed, he quickly ducked into the back room, changed out of his uniform, and re-emerged in casual clothes, trying to blend in with the crowd. With a fake smile plastered on his face, he approached Michelle as though nothing had happened. At first he tried to pass. He slipped from behind a floristry table in clothes that pretended to claim belonging. He mouthed a vague greeting like a man attempting an old script. His hands fumbled, his smile was press-on. When he got too close, the room seemed to tilt in a new axis. Whispers traveled the line of guests like a rumor. A manager from the catering team spotted him leave his post, and the theatrical correction was swift. "Daniel. Where do you think you're going?" The man's voice cut across the room. "You leave your job to flirt with our guests? Who do you think you are?" The boss's voice silenced the room. He berated Daniel in front of everyone, calling him out as nothing more than an employee who had abandoned his duty. Then, in a shocking twist, he slapped Daniel across the face, demanding that he return to his uniform. The slap landed like punctuation. Phones lifted. A few people gasped, some murmured in shock, others watched with the small glee of an audience watching a bad actor get called off stage. Daniel's cheeks burned, he retreated and was dragged into the back room. The boss apologized to the guests, smoothing the scene back into order, then ordered Daniel to bring Michelle wine immediately. Humiliated beyond belief, Daniel shuffled back into the small room, changed into his catering uniform once more, and returned to the banquet with a tray in hand. His hands trembled as he approached Michelle. He couldn't even look her in the eyes as he mumbled under his breath, "Things didn't work out with Vanessa. I lost my sales job. I'm just trying to get back on my feet." The apology was thin and ragged. He stumbled through a list of half-answers. The crowd's attention was a pressure that condensed his words into something small. Michelle held the glass like it weighed nothing at all and thought about the late-night shifts that had paid for her textbooks, the mentors who had told her to keep a ledger of wins, the nights she printed proposals on a borrowed printer. She smiled, but the smile was not triumph. It was the grace of someone who had closed a closed chapter. Michelle simply smiled, saying nothing. She accepted her glass of wine, holding her composure with grace, while Daniel shrank away in shame. The crowd whispered, disgusted by Daniel's audacity to pretend moments before that he belonged among the guests when in truth, he was just serving them. In the days after the gala, small fragments of the scene circulated, a clip shared on a social feed, a caption that framed the moment reductively, comments that both praised Michelle for composure and criticized her for perceived coldness. Reality, always more complicated than a comment thread, settled in the office. Michelle returned to her calendar, to meetings and memos, to the practical rhythms of leadership. Daniel returned to his shifts, to the back rooms, to the repetitive tasks that kept a venue running. A week later, Michelle's firm received a job application. The name on the resume made her freeze for a moment. Daniel. Desperation had driven him to apply for a position at her company. Michelle calmly forwarded the resume to HR, attaching a single note, "Fit for the cleaning position only." The HR process is administrative, which in this case acted as a kind of mercy. The resume came into a queue, references were checked, and the firm offered a position that was honest work. Daniel took it. He found himself mopping floors and running errands at the very firm where Michelle was now a rising star. The pay was steady, better than the gig work he had cobbled together, but it did not erase the past. The title did not transform him overnight. He showed up early, learned the systems of the building, and slowly adjusted to a life defined by routine rather than mirage. For Michelle, the decision to place him where he could earn with dignity but not with undue influence was practical and unornamented. Every day Daniel was reminded of the consequences of his choices. He worked under the authority of the same woman he had publicly humiliated, now forced to respect her success while he struggled in shame. Michelle, on the other hand, thrived. She hadn't just proven Daniel wrong, she had risen far above his shallow vision of success. In the expanded months after his hire, there were small shifts. Daniel took classes offered through the firm's employee assistance program. He sweeps the entryway at dawn and returns the carts midday, and once stopped to help an older staff member with a heavy box without being asked. These are not penances that erase mistake, only actions that show a man trying to be better. Michelle walked past and sometimes said nothing, sometimes offered a curt nod. The firm moved on, clients were impressed at the steady hand of the team, narratives reframed from scandal to the more useful story of organizational resilience. Michelle's victory was not the fireworks moment people expected. It was a long accumulation of ordinary wins. She mentored juniors, responded to pitches with crisp clarity, and set standards in meetings that made people listen. She created a training module about soft skills and workplace respect that the firm adopted. She sat on panels and described the importance of accountability and boundaries. Her life was not defined by Daniel's choices, it was defined by the small structures she built and the people she elevated. Daniel's life had changed also, not into a melodrama of ruin but into a quieter procession of responsibility. He learned to let go of illusions and to be on time. He cashed his checks, bought a new pair of shoes that could stand a month's wear, and sent a text to someone who had once helped him with a loan. Some nights he sat on a stoop and watched cars pass with couples inside, and felt the weight of a life remade by different choices. He did not become a paragon overnight, he became someone who could accept being a different kind of man. In the end, Daniel's downfall became Michelle's quiet victory. Without vengeance, without anger, she showed the greatest revenge of all, living well and proving her worth beyond what anyone had ever imagined. If you've been humiliated, dismissed, or left behind, this is not a call for revenge. It's a call for relentless self-investment. Grow quietly. Build relentlessly. Let your life be the answer. If this story moved you, tell someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next story.